it gives you more experience with high conflict. And it's not for everybody. But when you are in a mediation session, inevitably, you're in high conflict. If it's going to be so volatile, that couple may not be appropriate for mediation. But if you're going to be trained in mediation and you're sitting in those sessions, that's something that you're going to be in. And that's very useful when you're in a couple session, a family therapy. I mean, most of the time, particularly with family therapy, they're coming after years of conflict. And I focus on adult family therapy. So you're talking about, say, two 20-somethings coming in with a father, and they're opening something up for the first time.
The Center for Understanding in Conflict welcomes you to The Other Chair, a monthly podcast exploring the dynamics of conflict and how to bring the human issues to the table. Together with our guests, we explore how the power of understanding each other can lead to better solutions for people on both sides of an issue. We will also share tips for managing your own mediation practice, approaching conflict in the professional world, and ways to apply our understanding-based model in your personal life. Hello to our listeners and welcome to The Other Chair. I'm James Dyken, and today we have a special guest, CUC board member Lisa Taubenblat. Lisa is a psychotherapist in private practice in New York City. She focuses on supporting couples and adult family members in resolving conflict and strengthening connections through individual, couple, and family therapy. She offers therapy for challenges such as depression, anxiety, trauma, disordered eating, grief, relationship and work difficulties, aging or caregiving concerns, and multi-generational conflicts. Thank you, Lisa, and welcome to The Other Chair.
Thank you for having me.
Thank you again. I've been really excited to talk with you because we have a lot of folks that come through our programs and who are trainers or even board members with this center who are attorneys or they work all the time in the conflict resolution world, but not a lot of people who can speak to what that experience is like when they work within the therapy setting or within family and relationship dynamics almost exclusively. And so I know that you are predominantly a therapist, but you also work with families who are struggling with conflict. And so I'm excited to have you here today to share more about your experience. So let's start with your background. Maybe you could give a little bit of a brief overview of your background and then how your work in therapy has helped you when mediating conflicts between couples or family members.
Mm-hmm. Sure. Well, thanks for having me again. Well, I'm currently a psychotherapist in private practice, and it turned out that I ended up focusing on couples and adult family therapy, though earlier in my career, I spent many years working in community mental health with many different communities, low income communities. And that was a wonderful opportunity and really gave me, a foundation to understand, the context of where people are coming from and how important that is when you're sitting in a room with an individual, a couple, or a family, to always have that context.
Where does conflict resolution come into play when you're working, especially with couples or families? Is there an interplay between therapy and conflict resolution? Is there an undercurrent of understanding that happens in both of those?
When we think about mediation, I think as a therapist as well, when you're walking into the mediation room, focusing on keying into the relational dynamics is really key. From the get-go, people walking in and just checking in, how are you doing? What are you sitting with today? Just validating that, this may be the worst day of someone's life. There's inevitably going to be a lot of loss, grief. And even if they say, fine, let's get down to business and, I want to talk about finances, you're at least validating how much what they're going through. And it also creates a sense of safety, I think.
Is there a particular approach that you take, especially when you're coming into a mediation scenario, but you're a trained therapist, to help get people comfortable with that, especially if there might be conflict that would get in the way of people being open or willing to confront the raw emotions that they're bringing?
Well, I definitely encourage people to slow down, in any situation, whether it's mediation or therapy, particularly when there's high conflict, there's a lot of speed and there's a lot of hurt and anger that might be there, and slowing things down so people can start to learn to shift the pattern in communication so they can actually start to listen is very important.
Can you share a specific moment? Of course, no personal details, but a specific moment where you helped a family or couple who are in conflict make a breakthrough to be able to understand each other better?
Yeah, well, I think that a key to that, themes that I see, actually, one thing being really starting to understand, if you're sitting with a couple, bringing out where they're each coming from as individuals. What is their background? What are things that they are bringing to the table, and how that plays out in the relationship. And that can really start to build empathy, because often when you have a degree of hurt and anger, empathy goes out the window. And so we always want to try to bring that in.
Conflict manifests itself in many ways in our personal lives, for professionals in the workplace and for practitioners who have made a career bringing together parties in conflict through mediation practice. Each month, the Center for Understanding in Conflict hosts live webinars with featured guests discussing best practices and sharing their experiences for tackling conflict using the understanding-based model.
Let's take a step back for a moment and talk a little bit more about how, as a therapist, you found yourself working within conflict resolution or mediating conflict. Where did that leap take place, and what drew you to it?
Yeah, that's a great question. I think it surprised me a little bit, but really, I was kind of doing it already. For some reason, I was drawn to really sit in the room with couples or families really struggling, and bringing out, that conflict and exploring it in depth. And I think, mediation really is an opportunity to, I think, honor the relationship, even if it's not going to go forward as expected. How that relationship is dissolved, I think, is something I really believe in. Not every couple is right for mediation. There has to be, a certain degree of emotional regulation, definitely an openness to still not work on the relationship, but continue to have a good enough dynamic, particularly when there are children involved. So that led me to look at it more closely.
And what steps did you take to do that?
I started talking to people who were doing it, started going to some mediation conferences, eventually did mediation training through Ackerman Institute, and really started to, incorporate that approach. And really, it's something I find very meaningful.
People may think that there's not a lot of overlap between conflict resolution work or mediation and therapy. Have you found any challenges in helping the people that you serve understand the difference, or where the two may make sense together, or when to keep them entirely apart? How do you approach that as kind of a dually trained professional in this field?
With mediation, there's a lot of business to be done, right? People come in, they have expectations, they want to eventually reach an agreement, right? Which is pretty concrete, very different than what goals might be in therapy. For sure. I think that even if you're not identifying in the mediation room what dynamics you're seeing, relational dynamics you're seeing, it's important that you know about them. You may identify them, but you're not necessarily going to explore them further in a mediation session.
Have you ever had a situation where an individual that you had in therapy then requested your assistance in a conflict resolution situation or a mediation?
Yeah, in that kind of situation, I would definitely refer, being that I'm playing one role as a therapist. I would definitely want to refer to a colleague.
And would the same approach happen in reverse if you worked with a couple or family in mediation and one of them requested your therapeutic services? Would you do the same?
Definitely. Mhm.
Throughout the year, the Center for Understanding in Conflict hosts in-depth basic and advanced certificate programs designed to train you to become effective mediators and conflict resolution professionals centered in the understanding-based model. Our training programs have been the gold standard in alternative dispute resolution for 40 years and is popular within the legal community with human resource professionals, ombudsmen, and corporate workplace mediation clients.
So, I understand that you've worked with a wide range of communities. Could you talk a little bit more about the different populations that you've served and then how that diversity, I know diversity is kind of a loaded word, but how the multiple types of communities you've worked with has affected the way you approach conflict resolution?
Again, the identity, the cultural background and context is always there, but I think that needs to be balanced with the presenting problem. To what extent is, for instance, this couple, they're coming with certain conflicts and certain expectations. To what degree is culture, race, religion playing into their issue? Is it explicit? Like, oh, I've worked with, queer couples. Recently there was a trans parent who was feeling excluded in a preschool community. And what does that say about the conflicts the couple is having right now? Maybe it doesn't indicate something to explore, but that raises something to me. And I think that, my approach is that clients are the experts on their own experience. And if there's something I don't know, I want to hear about it, because there is so much diversity in different, groups. I was working with an Indian couple who come from very different Indian communities in India. And I was very interested in learning about, their practices, and they were having conflict about, what to eat in the family. So I'm always open to learning, but I think that the priority is the therapeutic issue.
How do you address those very sensitive subjects around a conflict where it may not be apparent that they're to someone that could be coming into play, even though you may be getting a sense that it is? And for those who are listening, there may be someone who identifies with a particular race or profession. How do you approach multiple types of people and bring that out in a way that makes them comfortable and feel safe in doing so, even if you yourself are not a part of what they identify with in their background? And if you have any specifics you can share for others who may be, you know, encountering that in the mediation room.
It's important to check our own assumptions. It's always good to ask, but more importantly, to really meet someone where they're at. They may not want to explore that with you. That, however, that might be something that can be an obstacle to moving forward with the mediation process. For instance, if a parent has wanted to send their kid to a Catholic school because they grew up religious, and the other parent hasn't wanted that, they're in the mediation and suddenly there's all this conflict about where to send the child or how much money to give toward education. So I think it's really about meeting people where they're at. The most important thing is the rapport.
And between you and those in the mediation room, I understand, but how about between the two people who are in conflict and that they may feel or have a good rapport with you and feel comfortable, but not with the other person who they've come in because they're already in the throes of conflict? How do you work through those realities?
You again want to slow things down, which can, it sounds simple, but it can be very difficult when emotions are high and there's a lot to get done, right? I'm not a lawyer, but there's a lot of legal and financial business to take care of. I believe the priority should be what is going on between the two people. That is what is going to determine how fluid the process can be to get to that end result.
So you've mentioned slowing things down a couple of times. Can you provide an illustration for folks who are listening about how you might do that in a mediation room?
It's important to, even though clients are experts, I used that word before, on themselves, you're the expert in the room and it's your space. I know we've gone to remote in a lot of cases. It's still your space and you're in charge. And one of the most important things is for there to be safety. And when people get too dysregulated, it can feel very overwhelming. And it not only is it hard to get anything done, which is what you want to do in mediation, but in therapy, it's really, if it's too overwhelming, it's very difficult to sit with, for people to sit with, to tolerate, but also for there to be any kind of productive communication. So there's that kind of zone of tolerance where you don't want people to be too overwhelmed. You want them to be challenged, but not too much. So I always try to bring that down and also check in with people during a session after. How was that for you? I noticed that when we talked about custody, you seemed like maybe you needed more time or you needed more information or you had some feelings about it. So that's really key to once there's too much intensity, so that when I say it's your room and a safe space, I mean, you may have to really be very boundaried and structured and wait a minute, we're gonna take a beat. You have the floor for a while. Now it's time for mom, whatever it is. And that can be, I think with experience, that gets easier, but that can be challenging.
Are there ground agreements to come into play in the beginning so that folks in the mediation room know that when that happens, it's part of a process to help bring things down and bring people together, and so they don't feel like you're taking sides or confronting them when their emotions start to come out?
Again, my approach is to read the room and really see with a particular couple, what are some of the obstacles that in the dynamic that could get in the way, and then let's set a ground rule around that. Maybe they're talking over each other all the time. Maybe they're cursing. That is only going to make things deteriorate and be unproductive, right? So I think it's very individual. It may take some time to get to know the couple a little bit, and they may be not ready or very disinterested in you getting to know them too. So again, meeting them where they're at is so important.
So speaking of ground agreements, when you are coming into a mediation or conflict resolution scenario, do you have a meeting with those folks first and say, this is kind of how the process is going to go. And if things start to get heated, I might point out what's happening and bring it down? Or from a therapy perspective, do you wait for a problem to present itself and point it out before it gets addressed?
Yeah, I think that's really important, an important question, because you're speaking to the beginning, right? And one thing I always do in therapy as well is I don't want to just take someone emails me, sure, let's go ahead. I always want to have an introductory call, if it's mediation, with each person, not just about the nuts and bolts, but what is their motivation? Where are they coming from? Just to give me a flavor of their needs, and also for them to have a sense of how I work. If I'm working in family therapy, I will have a call with each family member. Firstly, to really assess motivation, because if the people are not there to work on the relationship, and this one's there, oh, I'm going because my wife wants me to go. I'm not really interested in resuming a relationship with my son, but I'll go because he wants me to. So really getting a sense of where people are from the get-go can give you a little bit of a flavor in the very beginning. But surprises happen.
Is there ever a time when you don't speak to both parties in advance of meeting them for the first time in the room?
I think that's very important. I would not want to be in a position of just, entering a room. Also, I want to assess for safety if there's any kind of, domestic violence going on, or any kind of, serious mental health issue, risk factors there. That's very important. What's going on with the kids? Just again, to get the flavor of things.
This podcast is supported by our CUC Connect members, whose yearly membership includes free attendance to our live monthly webinars, 12 additional featured recordings of past training events, and support from our network of certified trainers for continued professional development. Consider joining CUC Connect today and dive deeper into the understanding-based model.
Could you talk a little bit more about you as a therapist, very much a trained therapist, going into a mediation setting? Is there ever time where your skills as a therapist make the process easier for you? And are there times when maybe you have to check yourself because the approach is starting to go more towards your therapy training and away from the conflict resolution component?
It can be a fine line, because you really I don't want to get into therapeutic treatment. That's not my role in that setting. So that it can be a difficult balance. I also don't want to, if I'm in my role as therapist, I don't necessarily want to be giving a lot of information about, legal or financial or mediation necessarily. So yeah, that can be a real challenge.
How do you maintain that balance?
Well, one thing that I think is so important with all these questions is, and this is a lifelong process as a therapist, and I think it's true for mediators as well, is to have that really constant peer support, supervision, mentors, people you can sit with and work on a question like that comes up. Whether you're 25 or 80 and you're a therapist, you want to be working through these issues with other colleagues and mentors, and in your personal life too. Not that you would break confidentiality, but things that might get kicked up for you, because really such a big part of being a strong therapist is getting in touch with what this is bringing up for you, and that self-awareness. And I think that for mediators, that's a very important issue as well, to really be aware, because it's great information. You're a mediator, you're sitting with a couple. Gee, why am I feeling so anxious right now? What is going on with this couple? There's something that feels a little off that I'm not getting. Let me check it. Let me check it again confidentially. Let me check it with my, my supervision group or my mentor. There's something I feel is going on here. Maybe I'm missing it because, the authoritarian manner of that, that man is, because of my background, making this up, my background is, rubbing me the wrong way, so maybe I can't. So all of those things, again, reading the room and getting a sense of what it's kicking up for you, which is very difficult. And that's really the hard part.
As an independent practitioner, it sounds like you definitely have people you can talk to within the therapeutic community, other colleagues and professionals. Do they understand the approach in conflict resolution and mediation? Do you have others that you speak to about that? And I ask because a lot of mediators, especially, are independent practitioners. They're not part of a large practice. They don't have a lot of connections, or may not have a mentor to help them get feedback. So what advice do you have for that, and how do you address those differences?
Yeah, I think that it's such a meaningful question. I mean, that it's so important. And I think with COVID and remote work, it's become even more difficult, right? Because people are more isolated. For a long time, we weren't meeting in person. We're meeting in person less. I think we're all not doing enough of it. I think it's really important to, go to conferences and really maybe set up peer groups. I was just asked to be part of a couples therapist peer group that isn't facilitated. I said, okay, and I think there's more to be done there in the mediation field for sure.
Is there a place in the therapy room for conflict resolution tools and training? Even if you're not specifically mediating a conflict, but you have, a couple who are in therapy, is there a place for those tools that you've learned there?
Yeah, I mean, I think having the experience in thinking about it for myself and my experience, I think it gives you more experience with high conflict. And it's not for everybody. But when you are in a mediation session, inevitably, you're in high conflict. If it's going to be so volatile, that couple may not be appropriate for mediation. But if you're going to be trained in mediation and you're sitting in those sessions, that's something that you're going to be in. And that's very useful when you're in a couple session, a family therapy. I mean, most of the time, particularly with family therapy, they're coming after years of conflict. And I focus on adult family therapy. So you're talking about, say, two 20-somethings coming in with a father, and they're opening something up for the first time. Again, for the therapist or the mediator, that's going to kick up a lot in you. And to be able to sit with that is a real challenge. I see that with younger therapists. That's really, and remembering myself, I think that you could learn a lot from sitting in mediation and being trained in mediation in terms of yourself and your ability to navigate those situations.
My last question for you. My last question, Lisa, is what advice do you have for other therapists out there who may be considering either incorporating conflict resolution training into their therapy practice or transitioning their career in a way such as you have, where they're doing both conflict resolution, mediation, and therapy? What advice would you have for them to consider before taking that leap?
Yeah, I think it's very beneficial. It can only enhance your therapy work, I think. Yeah, I mean, along the lines of what we were speaking about before, just gaining more experience in couples dynamics and really gaining experience, but also working on yourself. Um, they're tremendous things to be learned. Yes, you'll also learn the practical, the legal, the financial, the laws, and all of that. But I don't think that's really where it's at. Um, I think that, yes, couples need that when they come in. But I think coming in as a therapist is a great advantage because you're already coming in with a lot of understanding of relationships, of development, separation, what that means, loss, grief. Um, all of those issues are there in a mediation room.
Well, thank you, Lisa, for sharing your expertise today and for being on the other chair. Appreciate having you.
You're welcome. Happy to be here.
Lisa Taubenblat has worked for over 20 years in community mental health clinics serving low-income populations, including seniors, immigrants, and LGBTQ plus individuals. She uses a family dynamic lens to inform her additional role as a divorce and family mediator. To learn more about her work, visit www.lisataubenblat.com. LISATAUBENBLAT.com.
Thank you to today's guest for being with us today, and to our CUC Connect members whose support enables the Center for Understanding in Conflict to bring new perspectives in the field of conflict resolution and mediation to you, our listener, in each new episode. You can find out more about today's episode, along with full interviews and additional information about conflict resolution and mediation using the Understanding Base model at www.understandinginconflict.org.